Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, the idea of Britain and the EU failing to reach a trade deal, we've just been talking about it, has been hanging over those talks in Brussels. And yesterday it exposed divisions in the Cabinet over whether to spend cold, hard taxpayers' cash on preparing for leaving without a deal. Some even saw an intervention by the Prime Minister in the Commons as an attempt to slap down her Chancellor, Philip Hammond. Let's have a listen, starting with Mr Hammond speaking to a select committee in the morning.
And I don't believe that we should be in the business of spending, of making potentially nugatory expenditure until the very last moment when we need to do so. So we will be ready, we will spend the money in a timely fashion to ensure that we are ready, but we will not spend it earlier than necessary.
We are committing money to prepare for Brexit, including a no-deal scenario, and it might be helpful, Mr Speaker, if I update the House. The Treasury has committed over £250 million of new money to departments like DEFRA, Home Office, HMRC and DFT in this financial year for Brexit preparations. And in some cases, departments will need to spend money before the relevant legislation has gone through the House. And I can tell the House that the Treasury will write to departments and to the Public Accounts Committee explaining this process shortly. So where money needs to be spent, it will be spent.
Well, that was the Chancellor and the Prime Minister yesterday in what some Brexit supporters interpreted as what's known to journalists as a slapdown to the Chancellor. And last night, the BBC's Laura Kunsberg broke the news that this followed a row in Tuesday's Cabinet over the subject, with Cabinet sources suggesting Mr Hammond's behaviour is either deliberate and divisive or politically stupid. Well, let's discuss that now with the Conservative MP Anna Soubry, and she's in our Nottingham studio. Welcome to the Daily Politics. Anna Soubry, Philip Hammond said in that report we've just played that the UK shouldn't spend any money on preparing for a possible no deal until the very last moment. Isn't that a bit irresponsible?
Not at all. And actually, I think this is a completely fabricated... Sorry, I've got a bad throat. This is a complete...
Not the only one in the last few weeks.
No, mine's not contagious, though. Seriously, I think this is a bit of a fabricated story in many respects. And I think, unfortunately, the fuel's been put on the fire, such as it was, by some members, I'm afraid, of my own party, who seem to be absolutely desperate to cause division where it doesn't exist and to pour some scorn on the Chancellor. And I don't think actually it was semantics. I don't think it was a deep dispute between the two of them, and I certainly don't see it as a slapdown. Right,
except, of course, we know there are divisions through the Cabinet, because we've just said either sources from Cabinet said he is being deliberate and divisive or politically stupid. Which is it?
Well, I don't know. I'm not a member of the Cabinet, but I just think that this is really not helpful. Sources have said this, people are saying stuff, making noises in the margins, if you like, and then some of my colleagues go out and say things about Philip Hammond, and then we see these outrageous comments from the Daily Mail, which I had always thought was rather more trying to be a more responsible newspaper.
Right.
And this really isn't acceptable. I mean, this is serious stuff. All that matters is that the country's interests are put first by everybody, in Parliament, in government and in the Cabinet. No deal would be an absolute calamity for our country, and everybody must get behind the Prime Minister, work together to form a consensus. That's what we saw with the speech in Florence,
right,
which was widely welcomed, supported, the content was good, the tone was excellent. That is what we need to see more of. And, you know, we're talking about 20 to 30 people, I'm afraid, in my party, banging on with their own agenda, putting their own ideological needs above the needs of the country.
But why are they so cross, Anna Soubry? Why are they so cross, your fellow Conservative MPs? I mean, when they say things like Bernard Jenkins saying that the Treasury has been co-opted by the EU, but you say it's not helpful. Obviously, they feel very strongly that the position of Britain in these Brexit negotiations is being undermined by the Chancellor's attitude.
I can't speak for other people, certainly not for Bernard. You might want to ask Ian later what's going on in that group of people that I know he's a member of. These are not matters for me to discuss and explain. All I am saying is it's critical that the interests of our country are put first, not people's own ideological bangings on, as they unfortunately have been doing for many decades. You know, we accept we are leaving the European Union, people like me. And frankly, if I'm big enough to be able to say, I accept the result of the referendum, I accept we are leaving the European Union, and I now want to get behind the Prime Minister and get the very best deal, forming a consensus, then I really don't see why it isn't beyond other people to do exactly the same thing. And also to bear in mind this, you know, something happened on June the 8th. We lost, as a party, our majority in government. And the reason for that is because the people of this country voted against the no deal, hard Brexit that is still being advocated, unfortunately, by some people in my party.
Right.
They've got to stop. And if I can accept the referendum result, they have to accept the result of the general election, which was not to pursue a hard Brexit, but a soft, smooth, responsible Brexit that puts the interests of our country, which means the economy, absolutely at its heart.
But isn't he being a bit of an Eeyore, Philip Hammond, and rather gloomy about the prospects of a no deal, which everybody has said in government does need to be discussed? I mean, he said yesterday, Philip Hammond, he doesn't want to waste money. Is it wasting money to prepare for a no deal?
Philip Hammond is somebody that I worked with in the Ministry of Defence. He is a deeply responsible and honourable Secretary of State, and he's an excellent Chancellor, because not only does Philip have a business background, but he understands money. And so he's going to talk about money.
But is it a waste?
Just let me finish, Joe, because this is really, you asked me a very long question, there are about 3 questions in it. These sorts of comments about somebody are not helpful at the moment of some of the most important negotiations in the history of our country, certainly since the Second World War. Doesn't help. Let's all form this consensus, get behind this government and get the best deal. Let's take the personalities, the name-calling out of it. Your viewers don't like it. My constituents in Broxtowe don't like it. It's not doing anybody any favours. It's not doing our nation any favours. It's time to put the country first, not personalities, not scoring cheap points. It's the economy that's the most important thing, and it's safe in Philip Hammond's hands.
Right. I mean, Jacob Rees-Mogg doesn't think so. He said dishonest and bordering. I mean, but these are people who are invested in there. Bordering.
Joe,
yeah, go on.
I'm really not going to get into this sort of personality politics. Talking about other people in this way doesn't help. People are tired of these sorts of debates. They are tired of this sort of language. They just want us to get on with Brexit, to get a good deal and stop all this nonsense, squabbling and name-calling.
Anna Soubry, thank you for joining us. Ian Duncan-Smith, no deal would be a calamity.
Well, actually, no deal is about going to the World Trade Organization terms in Geneva and setting those between the EU and between the UK. Of course, it's not the preferred option. The preferred option is that we have an arrangement. You know, these two elements have been together for 40 years. We'd like to make sure that much of that process of trade and good cooperation continues afterwards. So it's in both our interests. But a government has to plan for all eventualities, and all eventualities might be that the European Union simply doesn't want to make a deal, in which case you have to go to the World Trade Organization, which is, by the way, how we operate elsewhere around the world. So the argument here, by the way, and I don't disagree with Anna. Well,
so you don't disagree. Anna Soubry says the name-calling must stop.
I agree. I don't.
Well, Jacob Rees-Mogg saying bordering. Well, I mean,
I'm not in the business of name-calling, but I will say is that.
So you don't think the Chancellor's undermining the negotiations?
Well, this is the real slight problem here. They have an agreement in Cabinet, which is great, and then they go to that agreement. What then creates the problem is when the Times runs from the back of an article by the Chancellor, an extension that says he disagrees with what the agreement was. Now, whether that was correct or not correct, that of course always creates tensions. I asked the question in the Prime Minister's questions yesterday so that she would have the opportunity...
And was that set up, that question?
No, I asked the question because
Jacob Rees-Mogg said it was a set-up question so that she could then talk about... It wasn't.
No, I asked the question and I, quite clearly to say, what is the position of the Cabinet? Prime Minister made that clear. I understand the Chancellor has agreed that. So that now hopefully will settle things.
Do you agree it's a waste of money to start spending cash now ahead of the end of the negotiations?
Well, no, I don't, and clearly the Chancellor doesn't believe that because he's already allocated 250 million to the process. And that's why I was rather struck yesterday by the peculiarity of what was going on, which is he's already said so. His Chief Secretary, I happen to know, has written to every department to say, what do you need to invest in all these things? So that's all happening at the same time. And yet somehow yesterday there came out this idea that he wasn't going to spend any money when he clearly is spending money.
Are you part of the group that Anna Soubry? Well, are you part of the group that Anna Soubry just talked about? 30 or so MPs, hard Brexiteers who are ideologues, who are destabilising the party and the government.
I have no idea which group she was particularly referring to, but I do talk to colleagues on all sides. I talk to Anna as well.
She said you're part of it.
Well, I'm not part of anything in particular. I simply have this.
Are you an ideologue when it comes to Brexit?
No, I have a very simple device. We campaigned at the referendum. The referendum was won by those who want to leave. The country has therefore expressed its view about that. I was quite struck today on the Today programme. There was an interview with the co-chair of the Exporters Group, who represents all the industry. And he was asked by Nick Robinson a very direct question. He said, do you think that the idea of certainty is more important than whether you go to WTO or a free trade? And he said, yes, whatever it is, industry will settle around it. And the second question was, he said, do you think sometimes some politicians are a bit too negative about all of this? And he said, yes.
And do you think that Philip Hammond is a bit negative?
Well, I think sometimes we could be a little more positive about what our options are and how we intend to exercise them. I don't think you ever win an argument by saying to people, I tell you what, we're in a terrible state and we can't do anything.
Is that what he's doing?
You win an argument by saying, we have options on the table and we want to coalesce with yours, and that's how you negotiate. Right. I used to be an exporter. That's exactly how you strike deals.
Or should you just be honest about how you really feel, like Jacob Rees-Mogg, who says they have, the Treasury and officials, been incompetent, bordering on the dishonest?
Well, Jacob's entitled to his own views. My view about this is quite simply that the Treasury and the Chancellor and the government have to, at the end of the day, deliver for the British people the best deal they can possibly get. And that could be a good free trade arrangement if the European Union wants to do it. If it is not, we go, like the rest of the world, to the WTO. So we have to make plans for either eventuality. And, you know, when I was in business before, you always plan for both sides of the options because you can't be left. The last minute, I don't know what that means. All I know is the last minute comes up on you quite quickly, so you better prepare.
Thank you very much.
I've been getting away